All right, this is the Fresh Start Project, where we explore the growing loss of trust in social institutions and how we can break free from broken systems and move forward to something better. I'm Christian Mislowick, and with me today is John Tsarpalas. John is president of the Nevada Policy Research Institute, a think tank based in Las Vegas. This think tank's mission is to promote policies that encourage free market solutions, protect individual liberties, and eliminate unnecessary government restrictions on the citizens and businesses of Nevada. John, thanks for being with me today.
Thanks, Christian. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see you too. Now, I did some freelance work for you guys a few years back. And so that's how I first learned about some of your work, what you guys are doing, what you and your team are doing. And it's really interesting. You've done a lot of stuff on government transparency. And that's actually something I'm very interested in. Because first of all, I want to hear about how you guys helped improve government transparency in your state. And also, I'm just interested in this topic of the role that individuals, citizens, and groups can play as watchdogs, because we have a democratic republic if we can keep it, as Franklin said. And I think one of the ways we can keep it is if outside organizations hold the guys on the inside accountable. So a lot to get into today.
Right. I also want to bring up, you mentioned our mission and free markets and accountability. And I recently, it clicked in my brain, it is all about accountability. And that's why we struggle with government, because of the lack of accountability in government. Free markets are always self-accountable because there's always two people in a relationship and there's a trade between the two of them. Yeah. In government, it's very lopsided. And so there lacks accountability. And we're seeing that in, just parents being upset. It seems like the teachers' unions and the educrat bureaucracy dictate schools are closed or dictate the curriculum and never are really accountable to the parents. And here in Nevada, schools are terrible, just terrible. They're always ranked in the bottom 5 in the country. And it doesn't get better, but there's really no accountability ever. I mean, they never talk about the fact they've eliminated all testing. The goals are set very low. But I'm getting off on a tangent, but what I wanted to say was you brought up accountability. Yeah. And I think that that's really what Nevada Policy's job is to be a watchdog, to point the lack of accountability out and to give solutions that you can put, to put accountability into these institutions, and particularly government lacks it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with how you kind of helped improve that in Nevada. So
sure. Well, one of the things that we've done, we've started years and years ago on open records, on knowing what is going on in government. Since we the taxpayers and we the citizens, this is our government, we should know what's happening. But there's a tendency of government not to want to share that. Number one, it's easier not when you get requested to show a document. Well, it's work. Who wants to do work to, send out the door? But also, they're opening themselves up to potential criticisms. Someone finds something they did they don't like, et cetera, et cetera. So Nevada Policy has done some interesting things. We operate 2 websites that have all the compensation and complete compensation records for all the employees in California and in Nevada. So we operate a website called transparentcalifornia.com. And there's over 2,500 agencies in California. We have 96% of all the government employees, state and local in California, their records are in there, including their pensions and their benefits. And so there's a total number. Tremendous amount of people use this website. I mean, we have 1 million page views a week of people looking up people, which is 50 million a year. It's tremendous. Oh, wow. Tremendous volume.
That's consistent volume each week?
Consistent. We've been 40 to 50 million page views a year for many years now. Why did we do this? So that, first of all, people can compare what people are being paid. So something that came up here a few years ago, there was a woman complaining. She was the treasurer for Clark County, which is the largest county in Nevada. It has about 2 million people in it at that time. She was complaining she was underpaid because she was a woman. So we go over to Transparent California. We simply put in the search, county treasurers. We found counties of equal sized budgets. And lo and behold, she was paid about $40,000 more than any of the other county treasurers in California. So that issue went away.
Yeah.
It was very simple to find that information. So we maintain these records because there's constantly little battles coming up in our state of Nevada. So we also operate transparentnevada.com, where we have all the compensation records for all the workers. We often see huge overpayment on overtime for fire departments. Firefighters have contracts that allow them to get paid overtime for all kinds of situations. To make a long story short, they had more hours in overtime than there were hours in a year.
Oh, okay. So how does that work?
Because of the way the contracts are written, so they'll actually not work on their regular day. So they're filling in for somebody else on another day, and then it's all overtime. And they managed to game the system. And so small town, actually the capital of Nevada, there were firefighters making $300,000-$400,000 average in overtime, not just their base pay, but in overtime. So we notice these kinds of things as we're collecting the data, and we're always doing downloads and Excel spreadsheet comparisons. So it gives us a way to be a watchdog on salaries, because they're always complaining they're underpaid. Well, government workers in Nevada make 27% more than the same job in the private sector in Nevada. So if you're a truck driver, you get 27% more working for the government, plus have a much better pension. So this is what a watchdog does, and that's a simple way we've done it for many years.
Now, when you mentioned the overpaid firefighters, now overpaid in comparison to other states, or how are you determining that?
Overpaid compared to other states, and overpaid based on what the average person's making. Here's something I never understood about firefighters, and it's all about the contract. Policemen work 3 8-hour shifts. They work 8 hours, go home. Firefighters get paid to sleep there. Okay. Why don't they work 3 shifts? Why do they get paid for 24 hours straight? It's just very weird. So it's, of course, there's a horn going off in the background. You hear
I can hear that, yeah.
I'm hoping it's not me. It was me.
I hope you don't need a firefighter after this.
There you go. The firefighters are outside right now.
Right.
So, it just doesn't seem fair. Why not hire more firefighters? Why not everyone make 6 figures, but not 400,000 a year?
Yeah.
Have more, spread it amongst more. Just questions that you don't get answers because of union contracts.
Yeah.
Something else we did, you were asking about transparency. We started a coalition, a Nevada Open Records Coalition, where we co-founded it along with the Nevada Press Association, because government was giving everybody such a hard time when you'd request a record, they were avoiding it. And then they would say, well, that's going to cost us X amount of dollars to pull that together. When the law in Nevada specifically states that there should be a very reasonable fee, it should just be for copying. It should not be for staff costs, because those should be built into the system already.
Right.
So we got into a big fight over that. We attempted to put a fine on the manager that was declining the request, but that got subverted because of union pressures. And so now there's a $1,000 fine payable to the person who's requesting if they don't get the information for a reasonable dollar amount in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay.
So the taxpayers are still paying the fine. The bureaucrats still off the hook because there's no accountability to bureaucrats. They don't get fired.
Right. So that's something I want to dig into, because I was reading up on this, the Transparency Project, and in order to even build this website, to build this database of salaries, you had to propose new reforms to public record laws. Is that right?
Well, we started building it, but we continue to fight the fight. When we first started doing the requests, we got a lot of pushback from a lot of agencies, and we threatened lawsuits, and we sued. As we started winning those lawsuits, because the law is clear, they have to give the records, but they try to ignore it and push back or whatever. And as they started to lose, so at this point, we've trained the agencies, it's not worth fighting it, and they don't.
Gotcha. Okay, so you didn't change the laws. The laws were always there. The
laws were there for us getting those compensation records, but the laws were not there for the average citizen getting their requests met.
Right. Yeah.
And for the press, one of the things was body cam footage was a big fight. The local police, I believe, wanted $800 an hour to edit the footage. Well, turn over the raw footage. I mean, you know, the crazy dollar amounts were being quoted in order to see things that you should be able to see.
So they would charge you, and would that be like if you had a Freedom of Information Act request, they could charge you that?
Right. So what's called an open records request on the state level, the Freedom of Information Act is a federal level.
Yeah.
But same concept. And they would want to charge you for the time to pull the materials together or to edit the materials, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know, on compensation, it's just download a spreadsheet and send it. When it comes to video, yes, maybe there's a little more time in it. Maybe you have to cut out parts that show something that's in trial or whatever. We get that. But the dollar amount being asked was ridiculous as well. So we've gone to court over this. We have put together this coalition, and we did a massive, what's the right word, lobbying of the legislature to get this passed and put a lot of pressure on. And because we had the Press Association with us and a lot of local TV stations, radio stations, there was a lot of media momentum behind it. So it was a coalition that worked well. It's a coalition that's still hanging tough. And you're asking this in the right week, because this is actually National Sunshine Week. It's the week for transparency.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
That's
so
good.
Your
good
timing is perfect. I don't know when you're going to air this, but it's happening here.
Yeah. Well, it's encouraging to hear about a media group joining forces with you for more accountability. I mean, one of the questions I want to get into is the difference between how citizens can be so much more productive at a state or local level compared to the national level, but most of the attention is on federal issues. It's federal government all the time, things that the average citizen really doesn't have a lot of control over. And I think also like the national coverage of political topics are, you know, it's fairly mainstream media is fairly captured by the left. So at the local level, it varies from place to place. So this is a good example of that, I think.
Yeah, all politics is local, to quote the famous phrase.
Yeah.
I think that was Tip O'Neill, famous Speaker of the House, who made that statement. And so it's interesting too. I find it with most people, because what they see in the news, they don't hear the local. You'll find more local in the newspapers if they still exist in your local newspapers. Your local TV and radio has less of it. There's just less reporters at the local level nowadays. I mean, 30 years ago, they were well funded, but because the news media funding model has changed, there's been major cutbacks in state and local levels. A lot of the local investigative reporting and local state house reporting has moved to not-for-profits. I don't know if you've realized that. I mean, the biggest news source for state and local news in Nevada is a private not-for-profit. Of course, left-leaning, but it's there and doing a job that needs to be fulfilled. But people really need to look at their locals, because their locals is where it all starts. It's what really is going to affect them. It is their schools. It is their fire and police department. And that's the stuff that you're going to deal with on a day-to-day basis as a resident and a citizen. The federal stuff, first of all, it's a whole lot harder to fix it, because it's happening, you know, nationally, and to change that many minds. But locally, small groups of activists can do a lot.
Right.
And people don't think that way enough. It's changing. The pandemic really motivated parents. And there's a lot of small parents groups springing up here in Nevada. And there's some other smaller groups springing up just because they think things are very lopsided here. And we live in a lopsided state. This is no longer a purple state. It is a deep blue state.
So what are the parent groups? Are they pushing for education choice, like more?
Correct. They're pushing on a bunch of levels. Number one, to get back control of their local school boards. Often, not everywhere, but often, the local school board is controlled by the teachers' union. The teachers' union, because it has a vested interest, goes out and recruits candidates, gives them money through political action committees, helps run their campaigns. And so some average parent that wants to run is running against a fairly well-organized union campaign for election versus someone who's never run a campaign. So it's tougher, but parents are coming together. They're forming groups, political action committees, trying to put together a slate of parents. They're running, number one, a lot of it has to do with fear of critical race theory or what's being taught.
Yeah.
I mean, sex ed, even at first grade, is, in my mind, going way too far in some of our schools. We don't get into the social issues, but what schools are teaching is important. But then, yes, it's also about school choice, because let's go back to accountability. What's wrong with the public schools? There's no accountability. The schools, as we have seen, in my mind, are accountable to the teachers union or the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And I think the student is not even a secondary thought. It's somewhere lost down the line, the actual education. There's no testing in our schools. They've eliminated all testing on the grounds that it's racist. In Nevada, they've done it on that basis. And I just can't believe there isn't some other way to measure outcomes. The goals here in Clark County, which is the largest county, the Las Vegas area, Clark County is 2 million people. I'm trying to remember how many are in the school system. They're happy if 33% of sixth graders can read at grade level. 33%, not 98%. 30, so I mean, they've come up with some ridiculously low goals and hopes. And it's sad because the children here aren't being taught. And then yet the school bureaucracy, school system constantly fights for more money for the public schools, but will not allow school choice to happen.
Yeah.
Florida had school choice passed a few years back, maybe 10 years back with Jeb Bush, and they went from the bottom 5 to the top 5. A lot of charter schools was the outcome of that. And people say, well, that's going to destroy the public school. Well, public schools didn't go away. They just had to up their game to compete against the charters to keep kids coming to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they created some accountability somewhere by having competition.
Yeah.
So how do we put competition back into schools? And there's no such thing as merit pay for teachers. I mean, a good teacher, you wouldn't know it. It gets around amongst the parents and they try to play internal politics to get the kid in the right classroom with the better teacher. I mean, I played that game back in Illinois with my children when I lived there. So it's, well, first of all, the outcomes are sad for the children. I don't know what that bodes for the future. It's frustrating to parents. It's making them angry and it's causing them to step up, because you asked who's forming these groups, and it's parents. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to counter the unions and counter the educational bureaucracy. So let me bring up another thought.
Yeah.
People always rail against capitalists because they're greedy. Everyone's greedy. Yeah. Is not the bureaucrat greedy? Does not the person working the bureaucracy want more pay, more days off, or more budget to do more, to expand what they do because they believe in it and they think it's important? Mm-hmm. That's a form of greed. That's a form of corruption and power. And there's no pushing back on that when you live in a Democrat state where it's always more tax dollars to go feed the system that then feeds more around back to the Democrats. So it's a self-fulfilling circle. And the taxpayers and the parents are left out, hence the need for a watchdog such as Nevada policy.
Yeah. Well, it's encouraging that, that's one of the silver linings of the COVID lockdowns of schools. Like, parents started realizing what was being taught to their kids. They started realizing how difficult it is to get the teachers back into the classrooms when there's no danger to children or at least when there was less risk of catching COVID. Private
schools in Nevada never closed one day during COVID.
Really? They were in-person classes?
They were in person the entire time. They might have had a day or two here and there, but basically were in person the other time. They were shut down quite a while here in Nevada, and then they went to remote learning, virtual learning.
The public schools.
Public schools, which was pretty dismal. And it wasn't every day. It was 3 out of the 5 days, and it was just, the kids lost. again, it's hard to measure because they don't measure what was lost, but we do know that kids lost ground.
Yeah. So were there any stories about private school teachers complaining about having to come in during a pandemic?
I don't know of any. I don't know of any.
Mm-hmm.
Couple things that also came out of this is homeschooling rapidly expanded. There were 19,000 kids in homeschooled in 2019 in Nevada, and in 2021 it was 81,000.
Mm-hmm.
So almost more than four times as many. And I think one of the beauties of that is parents realized that they had more control over their children's lives, but it also cost parents. Some parent has to take the time to do homeschooling. There was a growth in pod schools and micro schools. Should I explain what those are?
Yeah, let's talk about those.
Okay, so pod schools are where some families get together and they teach their kids in a group setting. So 4 or 5 families might get together. One parent might specialize in math and another history, and they bring the kids together and they rotate around. That's a pod school.
Yeah.
It's an informal school. And then a micro school actually hires some teachers but these kids are out based on their being homeschooled, but the parents will chip in money to hire a teacher to come in for maybe certain subjects or for a certain time or all day. But you're going to get into regulatory problems as you make it a more formalized school.
Mm-hmm. Which is funny that there'd be such barriers to doing that if in the public school there's no testing, the standards seem to be pretty low.
Well, again, it's back to the teachers union and the bureaucracy. They feel threatened. When a student doesn't show up, money is not put into the school system. It's done on a head count. It's $10,900 per child here.
Yeah.
But when we had educational savings accounts for a very brief period and we had a larger opportunity scholarship program, only a little less than $6,000 per child was taken from the public schools. The remainder was left there.
Mm-hmm.
So the schools actually had more money per child, but they keep complaining about, it was less money. Well, yes, total, but you had less people you had to teach.
Right. Yeah. Now let's explain that. Like an education savings account, that's where the money, like in Nevada's case, the 10,900, I think you mentioned,
right.
that would, well, most of that, if not 100% of it, would be given to the parent to control where that.
No, so the educational savings account, which existed here for about a year and then got squashed by the left, was $5,300 out of $10,600 at the time.
Uh-huh.
So it was half. Yeah. Half followed the parent and with the kid to a private school or to the charter or wherever they went. And the other half stayed in the system. So the system had more money per child,
right?
But the total was less. And so they don't like that.
Because it's still a threat to their paradigm.
Threat to their paradigm, the threat that they might have to change, a threat that they might have to compete, measure something, up their game. And it's wrong. You know why? It's exasperating, as you can hear me stumbling here.
Sure. Well, parents are now motivated to change that. Are there any legislators or state level legislators like now interested in making this more a possibility?
We are a Democrat-controlled state. So they control both the assembly, which is known as the state house in other places, the state assembly. They control the state senate, and the governor is also a Democrat. And what people don't understand about Nevada, it is the most unionized state per capita. So we are at 17% unionization of our population. The reason is all the large casinos are unionized. It's the culinary hospitality workers that are the big union here. And they have elected the Democrats, but the teachers union's part of that organized labor movement. And the union bosses basically dictate to those Democrats, you will do what we say, or in the next primary, we will get you replaced because we control the money. We knock the doors for the Democrat Party. We get out the vote. It's our workers that are your campaign workers. And by the way, a lot of people don't know this. Within the union contracts for government workers, there is something called union leave time. So an employee, a unionized employee, can take a certain amount of paid time, paid for by the taxpayers, to go do union work, which includes political work, knocking doors. So our local police force, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police, there's $2.2 million in the budget paid to police officers to go do union leave time, or in other words, to go do political work. So the taxpayers pay them to go get out the vote for the people they want elected.
Yeah.
How fair is that to the taxpayers?
How well known is that in the state?
It's not. We harp on it, but it's not. It's hard to get that out there.
Yeah.
I mean, the Clark County School District has 5 paid lobbyists, paid for by taxpayers, to go lobby the legislature for more tax money for the Clark County School District. Who pays for a lobbyist for the taxpayers? Well, Nevada Policy has one lobbyist. If you donate to us, we represent you in the legislature. But again, it's, you've got to step up and pay out of your pocket. You're already paying your taxes, and your taxes are being used to lobby you.
How common is that in other parts of America?
All over the country. All over.
Okay. Lobbyists. I did not realize.
The unions are strong, that happens. And then there's also association lobbyists. So for instance, well, first of all, the teachers union also has its own lobbyists.
Okay.
And also.
So the district and the teachers union both have their own lobbyists.
Correct.
Okay.
And they might lobby for slightly different things, but it's all sort of more. It's always about more. So it's a problem. And the bottom line is the teachers union lobbyists are paid by union dues, which come out of teachers' salaries, which are paid by the taxpayer. So it's still being fed by the same system.
Are public school teachers in Nevada allowed to opt out of being?
Yes, there was a ruling. Well, first of all, this is a right to work state.
Okay.
So right to work means you do not have to join the union, even though the union is there. But then there was also the Janus decision in 2019, maybe it was 18, which was a Supreme Court ruling say that all government workers have the right not to have to join a union. And so that under those rulings, they do not have to become union members and pay dues. But there's a lot of intimidation that goes on.
Sure.
So for instance, even though we're a right to work state, when a new teacher is hired and they come in to sign their paperwork and get their new hire training, there is a union representative there explaining how they should join the union. And that, who's there representing the other side? The unions get to come to that meeting. Nobody else gets to come and say, you don't have to join.
Yeah.
So again, skewed.
Are they allowed to have, are there multiple teachers unions that can compete with each other for the teachers' dues?
A little bit. There's a split down here in Clark County, this again. But usually there's one representing an area, one representing a district.
Okay.
For the most part, but there's been an internal fight in this district.
Clark County. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you got to hand it to them. They've programmed the system very adroitly, and
they have captured it.
Yeah.
So how do you break that stranglehold? I mean, it's up to people to get motivated. It's up to voters to vote them out, and it's up to activism. I mean, small activism can do big things. The way I got into all of this was I was a construction contractor in Chicago area many years ago. And I got very upset with what I kept seeing as, well, building departments just kept adding more and more permits and permitting fees. And, it used to be you could build a building, I get it, you get a permit. You wanted to paint something, you didn't have to get a permit. Then you had to get a permit fee. Then you had to get an extra license. Then you have to have a bond just to paint. And so government kept growing. So I got involved in political campaigns. And I got very active and in my little area managed to help elect people because of my outreach and my organizing my neighbors. And so people can do that through parties, and they can also do it on their own through setting up a political action committee as a $25 filing fee and sending in a form once a year.
Okay.
So it's not hard. They just don't know.
And what does that enable you to do when you set up
a political action committee allows you to recruit candidates, raise money for campaigns, spend your own money doing your own campaign for somebody if they don't know you're doing it. So you, like the local person running for school board, you could create your own political action committee, send mailings for the John Doe for school board. As long as you don't coordinate with the school board campaign, you have unlimited spending ability there. That's why people rail against super PACs, because a PAC can spend as much as it wants on a candidate as long as it's not coordinated with the candidate.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, and you can do a state PAC for like $25 here in Nevada, as I said, and you have to file quarterly if you're active, and if you're not, you file once a year, but it's a simple form.
Yeah. Well, we'll see with what happens with these parents becoming more engaged and aware of what's going on.
Right. So there's a couple of groups that have sprung up in the last 2 years here. One called Battleborn Moms for Education. I love their tagline, and their tagline is refusing to co-parent with government.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And
that's actually quite profound because it gets to the heart of what's going on.
Right. And then there's another group here in Southern Nevada called Power to Parent Union. They put the word union on. They're trying to create a parents union that's bigger than the teachers union. Again, a smart way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the Transparency Project, you said you started that a few years ago. Did you notice any changes in state spending after the word got out, after people could see what public workers were making?
Well, it did. It slowed down complaints. It's interesting how workers would complain, well, we're underpaid, and then suddenly someone would pull it up.
Yeah. So
we have seen, especially on the local level, it's interesting. There's a town up near Lake Tahoe, Nevada, on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe, where there was an internal fight amongst the board members, kind of the left-leaning wanting to spend more and the conservatives not. And the treasurer was on the conservative side, and there was 4 board members on the left and 3 on the right. They wouldn't let the treasurer see the books. The town treasurer couldn't see the books.
Yeah.
But the town treasurer could go to Transparent Nevada and see what people were being paid, and didn't realize how much the town manager was being paid and how much the person in charge of public works was being paid, and would bring this up at town meetings and say, we're already paying this, and the next town over is paying that, and they're already overpaid. And so this happens a lot, and we get messages thanking us from people that are on a town council, city council, whatever, village, saying, I couldn't find the information. My village manager wouldn't share it with me, but I looked it up myself and I realized this. And when I brought it up at the board meeting, it shut it down.
That's incredible that a town council or a manager even has that power to hide the book from their own treasurer.
Well, they control the town lawyer. You know, so if you're going to sue them, you're suing against taxpayers' money to defend it. It's so inbred. Really, it's a problem. And that's why a group like Nevada Policy is so necessary. When it's a transparency issue, we always ask people to come to us and we'll go to court for it. We sue on the behalf of other people doing open records because we really feel it's important. And the law actually says the loser pays when it comes to open records. But we always win, so we'll get paid back. So we're pretty happy to do those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's encouraging. Thinking upon, I mean, obviously we can't compare Nevada to like a 10-year history without your think tank, with like what you haven't, like, let's say it's a wonderful life scenario where we could see
what happened if we weren't here.
Exactly.
I've actually written that as a fundraising letter at Christmas.
Yeah. How'd it go?
What would life in Nevada be like if there hadn't been a Nevada policy?
Yeah. And
I think there would be a state income tax. I think taxes would be much higher. The schools would still be terrible. I don't think they could get worse. So I don't necessarily go there, but we wouldn't know. We would have less open records. There's many things we wouldn't know. The criminal justice system would be worse because we wouldn't know what was happening in different cases. Reporters couldn't get stories and facts to put it out to the public.
Mm-hmm.
we would be even more in the dark. And it's more open, but it's still not open enough. I mean, why isn't every government agency's checkbook open online? So you know where every dollar went. Simple. It should all be there.
Yeah.
So that everyone knows every contract signed by every government agency should be online. But it's not. I mean, you have to request it, fight to get it, and you can get it and see it. All that should be part of National Sunshine Week every day of the year. It should always be National Sunshine Week. I mean, those are simple things to set up and get done. And then they'll always complain about the cost of a website or something, which is also another lack of accountability. Why do government websites work poorly, cost 10 times as much as in the private sector, and go wrong? I mean, we had some terrible systems here during the pandemic. Our unemployment system was an absolute failure. People were waiting 4 to 6 months to get paid when they got laid off.
This was during the lockdowns?
During the lockdown. I mean, okay, I get the system's overwhelmed, but the system was just badly designed to start with.
Yeah.
And yet that's been resolved just because of time, but there's been no changes to prevent it for the next time.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. There's been no talk about it.
No lesson learned.
No lesson learned. Why not? Because I guess nobody cares enough. I don't know. Who's accountable? I'm going to vote the governor out. Okay. That's the only person really accountable for the executive branch is the governor.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he thinks he's safe. And might be because of the makeup of the state.
Right. So let's say you're one of those guys who got laid off and you didn't get paid for 4 months because the website was not.
Well, not on the website, and then you'd call up and you'd be on hold. You know, the phone would ring for hours. There wasn't enough people to take care of things.
Yeah.
And then the fraud, they estimate there was $400 million in fraudulent claims paid. There's no talk of going after any of that to go find it and get it back.
Really?
Nobody's brought it up. Nobody cares. Federal government just sent them billions. What do we care? And so there's no accountability.
All right. So Nevada policy, I mean, it's a grim picture.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to be negative. This is what we fight every day, and it's frustrating, but people need to know the truth.
Right. What's your top priority now? What are your top priorities?
Our top priority is school choice.
Yeah.
Parents are mad. We've got an opportunity right now to get the legislature to pay attention because they're going to get voted out if enough parents are mad enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes across all demographics. I mean, bad schools hurt people at the lower ends more than it hurts the higher end. The higher people are sending their kids to private school.
Yeah.
There's some really great private schools here, but you can't afford them. It's just not fair, and especially the lower middle class, lower income. So it hurts. It's not a thing about race. It's all races at the lower end of the economic system and economic scale.
Sure.
And how are those kids ever going to get ahead if they can't get an education?
Right.
They can't read. They can't do mathematics at 6th grade level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's parents. That's our number one goal. Our number one goal is pushing activism and school choice. We're out there helping people get organized. We want people to understand that the problem is the union bosses. It is not the teachers. The teachers are victims too. They're trapped in a system where they have to teach one way, one style. So we're school choice, and schools could be offering different styles of teaching and giving teachers a little more freedom to experiment. And some of them would rise and they'd have superstar students and they'd be superstar teachers, and they could have merit pay, or they could go set up their own schools. We're finding a lot of those teachers that went to work for a micro school. We're very happy because they were free to teach whatever they want. The parents were thrilled to have somebody come in.
Yeah.
They could teach their own way. I mean, it's one size fits all with this giant school system in Nevada. And who does that help? There's so many kids that need other styles. There's not specialty schools for special needs or special tracts, kids that want to be more hands-on and go to trade school, or kids that want to be coders, or schools that are arts, schools that are languages, schools that are STEM. There's very little of that breakdown, and very little differences in learning styles. A lot of the homeschoolers are talking about how their kids are so happy because they're learning more hands-on things. They give them projects to do versus here's the book, learn it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot of exciting movement happening at the micro schools, the pods. And it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for coalitions to form between people who might have been on different sides of the political spectrum. I mean,
right.
Is
School choice is where it's at for that. I mean, really, they're going to have to come together and fix this. We'll have to. They need to be forced to, but enough people are mad about it, and it's growing. It's growing rapidly.
Yeah. So it's just capturing this moment.
Right. And they'll give you the excuse, what's needed is more money. They always get more money. And back to the teachers, it never seems to get to the teachers. The money goes into the bureaucracy, they hire more bureaucrats and spend more, but they never get it down to the teachers.
Right. Like schools are growing, but it's not teaching staff, it's administration.
Well, they're giving staff, but they're not getting more salary.
Okay.
And they need more teachers as well. So one of the things here, I mean, this, again, back to the Las Vegas School District, Clark County, it's never been audited. We don't know where the money goes. No one knows where the money goes. This is something we harp on as a watchdog. It would be great to know where all the money goes, but we don't. So it's...
Well, who do you talk to get that done?
Well, it has to be the legislature that passes it. It's the legislatures that fund the schools here.
Yeah.
In the West, systems are set up more where the money all flows through the state and then back out. In the East, there's more local taxation that goes directly. There's more property taxes, more county taxes, local taxes.
Right. Yeah.
Fund directly. But in the West, it being smaller budgets, smaller states. I mean, this is a smaller state. There's only 3 million people here, 3.2 million. So.
Got it. All right. Well, I mean, it does sound very encouraging that like parents are very animated by this issue. What are some of the lessons that you learned at Nevada Policy that could be used at other think tanks, perhaps in the West or even just across the country?
Well, think tanks have been also had transformed, being institutions themselves. And we've been here 30 years. We basically started on fiscal issues kind of right after the Cold War ended. We were formed so that people would always understand why free markets were important. And we, evolved into school choice. Why? Because if we don't have an educated populace, what's the point? It's hard for us to sell economics to people that don't know 2 + 2.
Right.
So we've got to bring it down to that level. But it's also about prosperity in that you need an educated workforce, number one, to be good citizens, to be informed citizens, but also to be a good workforce. And if they're not getting a good education, the workforce is never going to get to that next level. So there are businesses that do not locate in Nevada because the schools are bad. They feel like the workforce isn't going to be trainable or intelligent enough. Or you're an owner of a business and your upper management's moving with the business. They don't want their kids in the school system. So we're not going to Nevada. We're going to where there's better schools.
Yeah.
But back to reforming institutions. What we've realized is we've got to take our basic policy ideas, the research behind them, the solid ideas, and market them in ways that the average person will read them or learn about them. So it is a lot more social media, it's video, it's alternative mediums. We're really, really focusing on that. And we still do the policy paper. We still print a big policy paper. We put it out to our donors so they know what they paid for. But then we break it down into 1-page bites that we email, that we text, that we use all different mediums to try to get to people. So that's probably the number one lesson is how do we educate under 50-year-olds? How do we get to the different generations and each have their own medium? We're not on TikTok, but we should be. PragerU's done very well with its videos for a certain group. We're transitioning ourselves into breaking down into smaller segmented audiences, smaller messages.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the process right now of bringing on full-time Hispanic employee to fund our Hispanic department. We're translating everything into Spanish, as well as putting all that information into smaller tidbit bites that I'm sure school choice pollings, Hispanic community is for school choice like 78%. Mm-hmm. They just don't know what to do about it. So everything I said here needs to end up in Spanish and then out into their communities. And how do we do that?
Right.
So that's the number one lesson we've learned. But we've also learned the coalitions, bringing together strange groups. So back to the Open Records Coalition, which I mentioned, the Press Association, another really large partner was the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, who you would think be the last people to partner with somebody that was looked at as conservative or libertarian, but they did on that issue because they understand that information is important for cases, for attorneys to get information. The whole system has to be able to get information. And so they're partners on that coalition as well. Mm-hmm. Without that group, we never would have passed any of that legislation that happened in 2019. So there are ways to get it done. It's just you got to do it in different relationships that are not normally thought of. But those relationships are possible. And that is how politics works, comes together and see what you can, get across party lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like the three theories of democracy. There's participatory, that's more like you assume that individuals are doing it, but there's also elite democracy where it's like only the richest of the rich who are kind of pulling the strings of power. But then there's pluralist, which is probably the most realistic. Well, I'd like to think that it's the pluralist model, which is where there's like large groups that get together, and those are the ones that can probably get the ear of a legislator a little bit better than individuals as a on their own. And so if you have these groups, if you can facilitate people who can get organized, get together, like you were talking about PACs, maybe form a PAC and try to get something done together, united.
Yeah, I think we need to think about who runs our country, who runs our states. Yeah. In many ways, our institutions are running us, because they're not accountable. They have their own agendas. They have their own lobbyists. They tell the legislators what they want. And the people don't have enough say in it. I think that the political paradigm for me is not Republican, Democrat. It's institutionalist versus the people, versus the individual. That's part of the rise of populism, because there were things that people feel like real wages have been declining for 12 years. People know that, they feel that, the massive inflation, the gas pump, it's all obvious to them that government is failing that average middle class person or the lower, anybody other than the very affluent. And so they see that, they're feeling it, they don't know where to go. They do go back to the parties, but I think the parties are way behind on that, because I do believe both parties have large institutional segments, and then there are populist segments of it. There are those that understand that people are not being served, but there's a whole lot that don't really care or don't get it. Mm-hmm. So we're in a big realignment there. And I don't know if the parties will ever align with one or the other again or not. We'll see where the struggle goes. But it's up to the individual, which we still have the rights to get together, to talk about it, to learn, to organize, to become activists, to protest, to write letters, to push back, to really push back, because the system favors the institutions.
Yeah, over the individual.
Over the individual.
Before we end, I want to ask one question. You mentioned the word prosperity, and prosperity. Like, what does prosperity look like to you for the individual? Like, how can we achieve human flourishing for normal, everyday Americans, even if there's institutions that seem to be having outsized power?
So I recently went to a Women's Day event, and it emphasized victimhood. And I kept thinking, the women that come out of here thinking they're victims will never have in life what they want. And I guess I've been lucky because I'm a white male, but I never thought I was a victim, that it was always up to me, that I always had the chance. The American dream to me totally existed. Now, I made some money, and then I went off in this world of what I think is trying to help and give back to the world. And, you know, I don't do this out of money. I do get paid, but, you know, I made a lot more in the private sector. So what is prosperity? Prosperity is the freedom in my mindset and in me, as well as in the system, to allow me to be who I should become.
Mm.
Not everybody is going to be a rich billionaire, nor should they be. I mean, those that need that much have some kind of a deep need. But there's also fulfillment in so many ways in our world. And as we rely on government more and more, and we rely on institutions to give that to us, we're never going to get it because we have to go find it and earn it. And so this is about human growth. This is about you as a person growing. And when you're doing that, you're also helping your community. Because if you're doing kind of your calling, you're giving to the community at the same time. I mean, a capitalist, when they start a business, is solving a problem. A restaurant feeds somebody. It might feed them in a way they want to be fed to make themselves feel better because it's higher end, or it's cooking just like mom had made, you know, cooking, you know, it's cooking. So everything, when you're in a system that's free, serves and helps somebody's needs. And when we do that, we're all better off. That's prosperity. But when you start thinking, well, the only way I'm going to get ahead is to get a check from the government, or, gee, I don't know what I want to do in life, but, you know, I'm going to stay home and not step up. It's about teaching citizens that they have the ability, and if they don't know how, to figure out how to do. I mean, isn't that what education is about? It's how to find the answers you want.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think is great is if we're inspiring people to become activists, because they have to go out, figure it out, and do something. And then their community gets better, and maybe their schools get better. And so prosperity isn't just money. Prosperity is a spirit and a doing that we want the whole world, everyone in the world, to find their way. But also find their way in nonviolent ways. We don't need dictators. We don't need authoritarian people.
Yeah.
We need the freedom to let the other guy do what he wants, as long as it's not stepping on you.
Yeah, that's beautiful, John.
Thanks.
I feel like we could go on, but let's save that for another time. I mean, I'd love to hear about...
This is a good closing moment. Let's end on a high.
We'll end on a high, and I'm wishing you all the best of luck in Nevada, and it sounds like you guys are doing some great work there, so I hope you keep it up.
You too, and keep this up. We need more channels and more people to hear about it, and you know, we can check in again a year from now. Whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, have a good rest of the National Sunshine Week.
Thank you so much. It'll be a fun week for us.
Excellent. All right. And everybody who's been watching, thank you so much. And if you like this video, like and subscribe and share it with a friend. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care.